You're watching FemVids, I'm Sian Rolls, and today we're going to talk about baby making. Later on, or rather in the past now, because this actually comes out on Friday, on Thursday is kind of a more or less open mic for singers, poets, all that kind of stuff, for a particular campaign. It's called the For Fiji campaign, and it's to stop fishing of a particular kind of fish that is known to be overfished, and so we're trying to, or at least the whole event, and thus the campaign, is trying to raise awareness to stop people from buying that fish, to try to get people to stop fishing that fish during its spawning time. But more recently we've seen, at least in the news, thanks to who makes the news, a considerable increase in people having troubles with looking after their kids, and thus more kids going into foster homes because of neglect or otherwise. And the issue needs to be treated holistically. Now, how do we really do that? I think it's all about talking about baby making, to be honest. A lot of people may just have the sexy times and not necessarily think about the impact of those sexy times, particularly younger people, people that might not have access to information, and usually sometimes people put in more desperate situations are people that may not necessarily have the resources to access that information or services to prevent babies. Baby making is an incredibly costly hobby, I guess. If you have children, you have to think about things like making sure the kids are fed, making sure that they're clothed and toilet trained, and making sure that they get to go to school when they're old enough, and all that kind of stuff. You need to make sure you have time with your kids to make sure that they become the right kind of people when they grow up. All these sorts of things. And I don't think people actually talk about baby making a lot. I mean, I personally grew up scared because when my parents, for example, told me about the baby making activity, I was quite terrified of it because it made babies. As I got older and more mature, I mean, the conversations about actually making babies kind of changed a little too. As a human activity, are you going to indulge in this? How are you going to protect yourself to make sure that you don't have a child when you're not ready for it? And all that kind of stuff. And personally, I think that kind of conversation should happen a lot more. I want to talk about a whole lot of other stuff, but really, you know, I mean, we're gonna have elections and stuff like that, and I think that the cost of living is something that should definitely be discussed, at least as a family, when you're talking about all that kind of thing. More recently, current decision makers have engaged with UNFPA, or rather, have engaged with people in partnership with UNFPA, and very interestingly, the target focus group is really women and youth, and I think it should be communities as a whole, because babies don't just pop out of thin air. Men should also be engaged in the discussion, because as a male, you do to some extent have a valid stake in whether or not you have children, and you need a guy to have a baby in the first place. So whether it is about condom use or distribution, whether it is about how you actually plan around your cycle for when you can actually be able to have a baby and when you are in a part of a cycle where you can't have a baby. All those kinds of things aren't openly discussed, and that needs to change. Of course, it's going to probably have to wait for a whole generation before these kinds of things can change. And we have to start working now to raise these kinds of issues and awarenesses and all that kind of stuff. Say you might want a concrete example of this. Okay, somebody has a kid, and they may not necessarily have thought about the implications of having this child. Not only do you have to make sure that as a pregnant person you are getting the right kinds of nutrients and things in your body that make sure that the child develops in your womb healthily. And then you have to think about the cost of actually going into hospital. Even in the public hospitals, you have to pay, I think, a bed fee. And then you have to think about transport to and from home. You want to make sure you're in the best transport possible because you are carrying a newly born human being. Then you have to think about what kind of changes might have to happen to your house physically, and also what kind of things will you need when you have this baby. If you're a working woman, how do you make sure that you actually afford formula? Or how do you make sure that you actually afford a breast pump, or take the time to, for example, out of work, to go back home, a costly activity for some depending on where they work and where they live. And then you have to make sure that you are having one-on-one time with your child as it gets older, so that you are part of its life and you know what it's actually ready to know before you engage your child in talking about, you know, relationships and sexual and reproductive health and rights and all that kind of stuff. As well as normal everyday things like who are your friends, how's things going, don't take drugs, don't drink until you're old enough, make sure you eat properly, make sure you get exercise, all that kind of stuff under the sun. And then you want to make sure that they're going to the right kinds of schools, and whatever that means for an individual. But You know, while currently education is more or less free, you need to think about all the other stuff that goes along with it. You need to make sure that you're able to afford textbooks. You need to make sure that you're able to afford their pens and pencils and uniforms and shoes and bags and all that kind of stuff. Let alone the food that they need to take to school, also their breakfast, also maybe an afternoon snack because they're a growing kid. Also, you need to make sure that you're in a position where you have a home where the kid has a place to sleep, can make sure that they have their showers twice a day maybe, and also has access to extracurricular activities if that's something that they're interested in, which is why you need to stay engaged in your child's life so that they're able to tell you, this is what I want to do and what I'm interested in and can I do it please? So there are so many things that goes into raising a human being, and when you tell people these kinds of things, or when they're readily aware of the implications of baby making, they know when they're actually ready to start a family. For a lot of people that means find the right partner, have a good marriage, make sure you're financially stable, actually have the baby, look after the baby, carry the baby to term, have it at a hospital, make sure it gets all its shots and things at the right time, feed it properly. So many different things. And when you don't have enough time for your kids and you know, have to find ways for them to get taken care of, you have to make sure it's the right person taking care of your kids, because there is a really big issue at the moment with who's actually raising kids and who should be and shouldn't be looking after children. There are too many child abuse cases happening right now, you know, maybe not just in Fiji but around the world. So many things to take into consideration. So I hope if you are not yet with child, talk about these kinds of things to your partner if you have them, among your friends who might be thinking about having kids, all that kind of stuff. And thanks so much for watching. This has been another FemVid. I've been Sian Rolls. See you next time.